Hi everyone, please support our videos on Patreon. The link's at the end of the video and in the down there part. Thank you, you're lovely. I've complained about a lot of storytelling tropes and cliches, like redemption arcs and white favoritism, and that thing in anime and anime-inspired stories where they perv on underage girls and weebs act like you're xenophobic for pointing that out, and you have to explain that's not what xenophobia is, and that is for a different country entirely, and also it's something Americans are doing with increasing regularity. You know, the small things. But people keep trying to form a profile of my tastes out of that, and have a hard time pinning down what makes a story a deal breaker. Well, let's talk about that, and my most hated part of fandom culture. For me, the biggest deal breaker in any story is going to be the main character. I can forgive a lot if the main character is interesting. This isn't just about TV shows, this extends to everything. My favorite character in Mass Effect isn't Garrus or Tali or Anderson, it's Shepard. She's the most interesting character, and as I said in my video on heroism, I like to direct Shepard in a way that characterizes her as someone who wants to do good, but is so exhausted with galactic politics that she ends up taking the path of least resistance. A Shepard who would save the Council in the first game, but would seriously consider letting them die by the third game because they're the reason things have gotten so bad. Being able to just yell at the Council is so good because it makes their idiocy an enjoyable part of the story. It's part of what turns Shepard to the point of increasing ruthlessness because playing within the system isn't working. I would probably feel a lot less angry about WoW's storytelling, especially in Shadowlands, if the champion was allowed to just curse out all of these people. Chapter 4 of Chains of Domination features finding the Necrolord sigil, and Bolvar's big idea is to bring it to the Rune Carver. He's told this is a terrible idea by another character, but tells you to do it anyway, and when you bring it there and restore the Primus, he lectures you about how bringing his sigil to Zoval's lair was a terrible idea. And guess what? Zoval takes the sigil. This quest only makes sense if you're a Horde character, because why else would you just hand the sigil over to Sylvanas? Why else would you not take the 3 different opportunities to not do this terrible thing?
That was easy. Why would you do something as stupid as bring the sigil right to... Huh. Lucky me.
But you never get to do that. Worse even, you don't even get to curse Bolvar out for this terrible idea when it's all said and done. This guy buried us all, handed the jailer victory, and we're not even allowed to be angry at him for it. Giving the jailer the things he needs to win formed an entire villain arc last expansion, but now that it's a male human paladin, we suddenly can't shiv him in the back and dump his corpse over the edge into the void below. For all my outrage, the reason for this is obvious. This isn't something the developers want you to object to. For all the choices you have in Mass Effect, joining the Reapers certainly isn't one of them, and Blizzard certainly doesn't want you to question the Boy King's ardent sycophants. But anyway, let's pull away from video games for a bit. The reason this topic came to mind is that as I'm working on a few larger projects, I've been going back through discourse of plenty of shows, and I've noticed this tendency among fan bases to discount the main character or characters entirely. This stretches back, for me at least, to the early days of my career in the Brony analysis community, where it was commonplace for the fan base to put undue weight on background characters. The first episode of the show featured a minor animation error because it was animated in Flash, which is a program that's held together with spit, scotch tape, and Macromedia's lingering spite, and holy fuck, we would never hear the end of it from that point onward. Bronies were full of shit like this, finding one minor quirk of a character and then pumping it up to comical proportions. Heartstrings is sitting weird? Clearly she's got an Ariel-esque obsession with humans. This would continue all the way up to Rainbow Rocks, where Sonata shows excitement at a special lunch day, so naturally Bronies assumed that tacos were like crack to her. It's no secret that I never cared for this attitude, and I like it even less today. I've seen too many characters boil down to one-dimensional versions of themselves for the sake of memes, or simply because the audience is desperate for projection, like pathetically desperate. This came bundled with another bugbear for the show in the main 6 clique. This was a faux criticism created by Silverquill about how the show was centered too much around its main characters and needed to branch out to focus more on the world. People think I'm exaggerating when I say Bronies wanted that, but no, this was a common refrain from viewers and content creators alike. They really wanted My Little Pony to be an anthology series, and it never was that, and was never meant to be that. And even then, most shows aren't meant to become anthology series. Infinity Train worked as an anthology because its basic premise was practically begging to be one, because leaving the train is everyone's goal, but a mostly slice-of-life sitcom really didn't work that way. This came down to the push and pull Friendship is Magic's audience was having. I mentioned in the first impressions of the Ghost of Molly McGee that most modern cartoons can fit under 2 broad archetypes. Well, My Little Pony fit mostly into the latter, but occasionally dipped a toe into the adventure fantasy genre on series finales just for fun. And because of that, a subset of bronies, including the likes of Dr. Wolf and Silverquill, really wanted to push it the rest of the way in and were continuously frustrated when it wouldn't jump. As time went on, I noticed the inklings of this happening in other shows. It wasn't uncommon to see the main characters derided or flat out ignored, especially as the 2010s really ramped up on their sad uwu baby boy villains. People got into shows almost entirely for the villains or a handful of side characters, and the discourse centered around them first and foremost. For a hot minute, people actually argued that the villain was supposed to be the real protagonist of the story. Do you remember that? Do you remember when villains have to always be relatable and sympathetic was a common refrain? Fuck, I'm glad that time in our lives is over. While we aren't as centered around main villains these days, there's no shortage of people who still will do everything they possibly can to ignore the main characters at all costs. Like they have some kind of allergy to good characters or something. Granted, this wasn't the case every time. Steven Universe, for example, had the fanbase focus on Lapis and Pink Diamond more than anything else, but that was colored somewhat by the fact that the actual main character was like Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro got put into the machine that made Bonnie. Star vs. the Forces of Evil's fanbase saw a lot of focus on Moon, Eclipse, and Toffee, but again, the show did burn a lot of people's patience with the two lead characters by the end. However, in the first 2 seasons, there really was no excuse for it. In fact, the focus on Toffee was one of the more bewildering elements of the show's early seasons because he was so obscenely dull compared to everyone else. The main character was a bombastic high-energy whiz kid, and the main antagonist was a bombastic high-energy Saturday morning cartoon villain. Ludo remains the best antagonist the show ever had because he was a fun throwback to characters like Chuckles the Silly Piggy, and gave Star vs. its Dave the Barbarian feeling. Stripping that away to become just another bog-standard adventure fantasy show was one of the worst decisions the showrunners ever made, and the fact that they were applauded for doing it up until the audience realized exactly what that entailed is a tragedy. Watching cartoon fandoms continue to shoot themselves in the foot like this only becomes more and more depressing as time goes on. This trend of audiences completely discounting the main characters or at the very least shunting them aside isn't something from the past either. The most egregious examples are Amity, Hunter, Andrea, and Kylo Ren. When the Owl House first introduced the other kid characters, it brought them all out in the same episode. Willow, Gus, and Amity were all introduced, with Willow and Gus becoming fast friends with Luce, and Amity being an antagonistic character. At this point, Amity had no depth outside of being the bully. It wouldn't be until a month later that would change, but the fanbase latched onto Amity from the moment she was introduced and hyped her up incessantly, with only a few clips where her ego is bruised and nothing else. And the thing is, Amity had nothing to her at this point. It's a common complaint from people that the fandom reduces Amity these days to just gay panic and shipping, but as of season 2, that is what she is. Love interest, abusive parents, and that's it. Amity's relationship to her parents and her perfectionism only ever comes out in the 3rd act of any episode, with the exception of escaping expulsion and Eclipse Lake. Amity's abusive home life is a plot device more than anything else, something another character pulls on to get the story going, and the solution is almost always insultingly easy, and she's only ever really brought into an episode because Luce drags her into it. Amity is a one-note character. And I don't say that as a bad thing. Characters fit the roles they were made for, and there isn't really anything wrong with that. Amity is an obstacle for Luce to overcome, and then her love interest, and occasionally gets a few moments of depth. And that's a good thing. Trying to make Amity be more than that isn't going to work, and it would be a bad idea to try. Amity is a supporting character to Luce, and she has always been a supporting character to Luce. So why do people get so upset at the idea that Amity is reduced to just love interest when that is literally her role in the plot? Well, and if this gets posted on the Owl House subreddit, please cover your ears, you delicate little flower children. White favoritism. It's been a refrain for a while that the show has a white favoritism problem and the fandom makes it worse. Amity was the first instance of that. When she first appeared in I Was a Teenage Abomination, the fanbase instantly started hyping her up as the greatest thing since Ida the Owl Lady. They immediately projected every fucking thing they could under the sun onto her, and Lumini was birthed from this. That's all it took. It's by sheer fucking luck that Dana was going in this direction with them anyway, because there was zero basis for any of this. Amity was a minor antagonist at best, and Willow was the main spotlight of I Was a Teenage Abomination. There was no justifiable reason for people to go this absolutely crazy over her when Willow was right there. Hell, for most of season 1, Willow had more grounds for a potential romantic relationship than Amity did, but Willow was chubby and Korean and Amity was not and not. Whether it was deliberate or unconscious is irrelevant because the fanbase gets defensive and sulks when it's pointed out either way. And it's not like things were sunshine and lollipops before I Was a Teenage Abomination. I heard about the Owl House first from people talking about Ida, and Ida was the character that got me to check the show out to begin with. The first clip I saw was the fight of Lilith and Ida in Convention, and I heard a lot about Amity as well. Opening the first episode to find that the show was actually about this positively adorable little shit disturber was a pleasant surprise. Luce is the first surprise character of the show because anyone who tells you about it probably didn't even mention her. People who started watching the Owl House in season 2 probably heard about it from all the buzz over Lumity. And when you look at social media posts about Lumity, it's almost a guarantee you won't immediately know that this one is the actually important character, because the way fandom continues to hyperfixate on supporting characters, especially if those characters are white, can give vastly different impressions of a show than what you'd actually see when you watch it yourself. Season 2 only made this worse with the introduction of Hunter, who as a character has had an effect on the fanbase comparable to Anduin Rin, overshadowing every other character and causing white girls to endlessly squee about what a good boy he is, even though he definitely isn't one. Hunter was really popular among the same people who hyped up Amity, and then jumped ship when Lumity turned out to be a bad first impression friends to lovers romance, instead of the antagonistic enemies to lovers they wanted. So Hunter was their mulligan because he just got Amity's backstory sans the romantic tension with the protagonist. Didn't stop people, though. Immediately, the fanbase's perception shifted from Amity to Hunter because once Amity became a half-decent character, she wasn't a good vessel for trope obsession. And I've seen more than one AU where Hunter is adopted by Ida and replaces Luce as the protagonist entirely. The thing is, and I feel this continues to be what sticks in the craw of this end of the Owl House's fanbase, is that a major criticism of both Amity and Hunter is that they overshadow the show's non-white characters and demote them to extra, shunting them into the background. Even when the Owl House had its third season cut down in length, Dana Terrace never pulled back on the sheer number of characters she was introducing into the plot. But the thing is, while Amity and Hunter did cause Willow and Gus to be completely and utterly sidelined, and even their episodes in season 2 have generally just been them playing second fiddle to one of those two, neither of them have managed to sideline Luce. Amity's entire role in the story is a supporting character to Luce. Everything she does is to help and further Luce's goals, and Hunter is an antagonistic force in Luce's story, trying to stop her efforts because they interfere with the goals of Emperor Bellos. This isn't an Aang, Katara, Zuko kind of deal where all three of them are protagonists and co-leads of the story. Luce is the protagonist, Amity is the supporting character and love interest, and Hunter is the villain. And I imagine that is probably something that sticks in the craw of the Amity-Hunter hype train, the fact that they can't just ignore Luce like they clearly want to, because the characters they like come with Luce attached as a default. It's not another Star Wars. That's right, folks, we've hit the part of the video where I complain about the sequel trilogy again. The two co-leads of The Force Awakens are Rey and Finn, while the main villain, Kylo Ren, is just this wormy little pissant wearing shoes that don't fit him. It was actually quite a fresh take for Star Wars, Finn's character arc being breaking the chains of slavery and child abduction and escaping to find a healthier support system, which complements the co-lead Rey, who is waiting for a family that isn't coming and desperately wants someone to care about her. Finn bonds with Poe and Rey through shared tension in battle, it's almost like he's a soldier or something, and comes to care very deeply about who he views as his new brothers in arms. Meanwhile, Rey takes slightly longer to warm up to Finn, but eventually does, especially after he follows her to Starkiller Base and says,
"What happened to you? Did he hurt you?"
Finn, what are you doing here?
"We came back for you." What'd he say?
That it was your idea.
Rey has been waiting for someone to say those words her entire life. These two have some of the best chemistry of any co-leads in a Star Wars film. Their characters complement each other beautifully. They have this thing about hands throughout the entire movie, where at the start, Finn keeps grabbing Rey's hand out of anxiety, and later in the film, Rey repeatedly wants his hand when she's got anxiety, and just, like, they are so cute. They're adorable. Like, they're both worried about each other so much, and they help each other out of jams. They fight the grease bag together. Rey gets knocked out and Finn is worried about her, but then Finn gets knocked out and she's worried about him in kind. Like, aw, they're adorable. So what happened?
Who is the white male audience supposed to identify with? Simple. The little white cockball.
Every time.
So the problem is that people are racist. People speaking positively about the film often called Finn a decoy protagonist or even a J.J. Abrams red herring, when in reality, J.J. Abrams was the biggest advocate for Finn's character, wanted him to be force sensitive, and put so much effort into his character it's fucking ridiculous. People blame Finn sidelining on J.J. Abrams when in reality, he was the only one not doing that. On the opposite end were white men and women losing their absolute fucking minds over the idea of a black man being a Jedi and having a romantic arc with a white woman, because apparently it's still 1966 and we've all actually been caught in time dilation this entire time. And one of those people was Disney, who immediately set about trying to undo Finn's importance to the story. The Last Jedi relegated him to comic relief and had him talked down to, with Kylo Ren replacing him as the co-lead to effectively pander to white supremacist Star Wars fans, including a horde of straight women who latched onto Star Wars to chase the generic-looking white actor of the week. Kylo Ren, as interpreted by Reylos, and indeed Reylos themselves, was something of a niche fandom early on, but by The Last Jedi had overinflated to take over everything, with people creating elaborate sad backstories about Ren being really torn over doing the right thing and that he was abused and really was a good person at heart. And if that fan characterization sounds familiar to you, you're not wrong. Reylos basically took Finn's characterization, glued it onto Kylo Ren to justify fetishizing abuse, and went on from there. And despite J.J. Abrams coming back and trying to reorient the story with the complete fucking mess that Johnson left for him, studio mandates from Disney forced him to make Reylo a thing and scrap a bunch of ideas he'd had for Finn and Rey, and fuck me, I hate these two movies. Finn was not the only victim, by the way. Rey's characterization of being someone terminally unloved and desperate for some degree of meaningful human contact was turned into her being obsessed with destiny and finding her place in the galaxy, up to and including trying to repeat Luke's feat of redeeming Darth Vader. Her entire characterization orbited around Kylo Ren through a force bond and later some kind of Ventus Vanitas thing going on.
When you were little, you formed a special bond. We are brothers who together make a greater whole.
Her entire character orbited around the antagonist, who ended up supplanting both of the original co-leads. And all because he was pitched right over the sensibilities of the kind of people who think Fight Club is relatable and who will tell you in no small part that they think Sylvanas is worse than Arthas. This is what I feel the Owl House's fanbase really wants to happen and are getting increasingly frustrated that it doesn't. You know, I started this video with the intention of talking about a hypothesis relating to side characters being easier to project onto and turn into socially acceptable OCs, and that's why main characters are frequently discounted. But the more I looked into it, the more it became clear what the real culprit was. In the case of both of these, bigotry forms the baseline of much of the backlash to the main characters, racism in the case of the Owl House, and racism plus misogyny in the case of the sequel trilogy. And the closer I looked, the more glaring it became. The Ghost of Molly McGee had people latch onto Andrea over Molly and Libby, who are both biracial. The last season of Infinity Train centered on Simon and Grace, only one of which decided to change her ways, but that didn't stop the fandom from latching onto and making excuses for Simon's unrepentant bullshit anyway. And take a wild guess which of these three Amphibia characters gets the most focus by the fanbase. No doubt there's already a small army of people in the comments insisting that it's not about racism, but it is. You can only see a pattern so many times before ignoring it is just irrational. Yeah, so, this went a different direction than I had originally intended, and now I'm just depressed. Oh, yeah, and since I mentioned it, and someone is inevitably going to ask, my favorite Infinity Train character is Grace. Thank you for pretending to be surprised. My image of myself as unpredictable is very important to me, and I appreciate you not breaking that delusion.